My name is Fred, and I am 62 years old. I've always been a man of routine and precision. My shirts are always crisp, my watch is always on time, and I've never left my home without the simple gold wedding band of my late wife on my finger. Not even on that Tuesday night, when the entire structure of my life was irrevocably altered. The fluorescent lights of the hospital ceiling hummed above me, an incessant drone, like angry hornets trapped in a jar. I'd been unconscious for a full 3 hours after I collapsed at my desk, right at the end of a punishing 12-hour shift at the financial auditing office where I worked. A young male nurse with compassionate eyes gently shook me awake, his voice a soft murmur of professional solicitude. "We've been calling your son, Mr. We've left him several messages." I squeezed my eyes shut, not because of the throbbing ache where my head had met the tiled floor, but from a deep, familiar ache of disappointment that had become a heavier burden with each passing year. Ethan hadn't come. I knew, with a certainty that settled like lead in my gut, that he hadn't. Did he call back?" I asked, the words feeling foolish, even as I spoke them. "Not yet, sir," the nurse said gently, "but I'm sure he'll be in touch soon." That was Tuesday. The next morning, on Wednesday, my colleague Susan approached my desk. Her face was ashen, a mask of apology. But there was a look in her eyes that told me she believed this was something I had to see. "Fred, I'm so very sorry, but I think you need to be aware of this." She handed me her phone. The Instagram post was from the previous night, time-stamped at 11:47 p.m., the exact time I was being examined on a hospital gurney. It was a photo from my daughter-in-law, Olivia. Her impeccably manicured hand was holding a glass of expensive champagne, her smile a beacon of joy against the sleek, modern backdrop of their high-rise condo. The caption underneath read, "Finally, an evening without the old man's endless drama. Sometimes the universe delivers exactly what you need. Blessed, peace and quiet, no drama zone." I read it once, and then a second time, a cold numbness spreading through my chest. I scrolled down through the comments. There were dozens of laughing emojis and messages from their friends, all agreeing about how taxing elderly parents could be. One comment read, "You deserve this break, Queen. Live your life." The post had garnered 847 likes. I handed the phone back to Susan and simply sat at my desk in absolute silence for precisely 3 minutes. In that silent passage of time, something fundamental within me fractured. The final thread of paternal patience I had held onto for so long snapped, as cleanly as a string of pearls breaking and scattering across a cold floor. "Susan," I said, my voice as steady and cold as a winter morning, "would you mind if I took a moment to make a private phone call?" I walked out of the office and into the concrete parking garage, my hand perfectly steady as I dialed a number I had saved in my phone, but had never found the occasion to use. It belonged to Eleanor, a formidable estate planning attorney. We had been introduced at an Oakwood Foundation charity gala 2 years before. She had pressed her card into my hand, saying, "Call me when you're ready to protect the legacy you've built." Her voice answered on the second ring, Eleanor speaking. "Ms., this is Fred. We met at the Oakwood Gala. I find myself in need of an emergency consultation." "Of course, mister. When would be a good time for you?" "Today," I replied. "This afternoon." And Eleanor, "I'm finished with offering grace." There was a brief silence on the line, then her voice returned, sharper, laced with a new level of interest. "I need you to help me draft a plan that will dismantle their greed." "I understand perfectly," she said. "Can you be at my office by 3:00? I will be there by 3:15 p.m., I confirmed. I sat across from Eleanor in her expansive corner office, my hands clasped in my lap, my wife's gold band glinting in the afternoon sun. She had summoned her top associate, a forensic accountant named Leo Finch. He was a slender man with thin, wire-rimmed glasses, who seemed as if he had been born for the singular purpose of meticulously counting other people's money. "Tell me everything that happened," Eleanor said, her pen poised over a legal pad. I recounted the whole story. The collapse at work, the hospital, the callous Instagram post, and the 847 likes that had publicly celebrated my humiliation. Leo leaned forward, his eyes intense. "What are the assets we are looking to secure?" "3 properties," I began. "My primary residence, valued at $1.2 million, a rental property currently worth $400,000, and a small lake cabin valued at $180,000. Additionally, there is an investment portfolio worth approximately $2.3 million. I also have 2 family LLCs that were set up for tax advantages, and around 200 zeros spread across various bank accounts." Eleanor's pen flew across the page. "Are there any existing legal vulnerabilities? Any powers of attorney or joint accounts we need to be aware of?" I took a breath. "I made Ethan a co-trustee on one of the family LLCs after his mother passed away 5 years ago. I thought it was a demonstration of trust." "That was a mistake," Leo stated, "not with judgment, but as a simple fact. But mistakes can be rectified." For the next 2 hours, we meticulously laid out what Leo termed the architecture of consequences. This plan involved creating an irrevocable charitable trust with stringent ethics clauses, setting up springing liens that would activate under specific conditions, and drafting cross-collateralization agreements that would effectively turn their avarice into a self-tightening noose. "How far are you prepared to take this?" Eleanor asked as I signed the retainer agreement. I looked her directly in the eye. "All the way to the bottom." That night I sat alone in my kitchen, the very same kitchen where I had baked 34 years of birthday cakes for Ethan. I methodically went through my phone, deleting every single family photograph. 2 decades of Christmas mornings, graduations, and wedding pictures all vanished. My mother taught me the language of mercy. The world of finance taught me the language of mathematics, often from men who assumed I wasn't paying attention. Tonight I found I had a strong preference for math. The next morning, I would begin to construct their financial coffin, and they, in their ignorance, would help me hammer it shut. If anyone has ever suggested to you that you're too old to begin a new chapter, let me assure you, that is a falsehood. Your narrative is not complete. You still hold the pen. Our best-selling book, Forging Your Path After the Pain, is filled with simple, powerful steps designed to help you heal, rebuild your life, and fall in love with living once again. The chapters on establishing boundaries that last and the calculus of self-worth have helped thousands of people reclaim their personal power after experiencing profound betrayal. Click the link in the description and begin your new chapter today. This story is about to get much more intense. Subscribe and activate the notification bell, because what Fred does next will leave you absolutely stunned. Believe me, you do not want to miss the conclusion of this story. On Thursday morning, I dressed in my navy suit with a silver tie pin, a kind of armor disguised as professional elegance. Eleanor had scheduled an 8:00 a.m. meeting. When I arrived, Leo had documents and charts spread across the massive conference table like a general laying out his battle plans. "We have devised what I'm calling a debt trap architecture," he explained, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. "Each component appears to be independent, but they are all intricately linked. If one domino falls, it will trigger a cascade." Eleanor poured coffee from a polished silver carafe. The genius of this plan, Fred, is in the timing. They will believe they are on the verge of victory, right up until the moment they realize they've been buried. The first document was for the creation of an irrevocable charitable trust. Everything will be transferred here, Leo said, pointing to a diagram. The house, the investments, the rental properties, but this is the critical part. There's a conduct clause. If any potential beneficiary comes under investigation for elder abuse, identity theft, or any form of fraud involving you, their access to all distributions is frozen permanently. I nodded slowly. So, they receive nothing. Worse than nothing, Leo corrected. They receive liability. He then presented a second set of papers. These are springing liens against both of the family LLCs. They are high-interest, short-term notes that will require substantial balloon payments in 6 months. The only way for them to satisfy these notes is with your direct cooperation, which, of course, they will not receive. Eleanor leaned forward, her expression serious. We are also filing sealed motions with the probate court. This creates a misconduct freeze, which prevents any heir from claiming inheritance rights if there is credible evidence of abuse or fraud. It's like a legal landmine, dormant until it's triggered. The third element of the strategy was what Leo referred to as the fire sale protocol. We will liquidate everything, and we will do it quickly. We might only get 82 cents on the dollar, but the speed of the transaction is worth that discount. The cash will then be moved into defensive accounts and the trust. By the time they even begin to understand what's happening, there will be nothing left for them to seize. How long will this take? I asked. 2 weeks, perhaps even less, depending on your commitment. I am fully committed, I assured them. Over the next hour, they walked me through the intricate mechanics of the plan. Every single meeting from this point forward would be recorded. Every document I signed would be notarized with a video backup. I would be required to speak 3 specific sentences on camera, affirming my mental capacity and stating that I was acting free from any duress, thereby creating an unassailable record for any potential future court challenges. What about inheritance advances? I asked. Ethan is always on the lookout for a quick score. A small, rare smile touched Leo's lips. It was the first time I'd seen him display any emotion. That's the most elegant part of the trap. There are companies that specialize in high-risk estate advances. They are, for all intents and purposes, predatory lenders who target impatient heirs. The interest rates are astronomical, and they always require personal guarantees. Personal guarantees? I repeated, meaning Ethan would be held personally liable for every single cent, regardless of whether he ever actually inherits anything, Leo confirmed. And based on what you've shared with us about his character, Eleanor finished the thought. Greedy people tend to make very predictable choices. I signed one document after another. Trusts, liens, fire sale authorizations, bank notifications. With every stroke of the pen, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders, as if I were shedding decades of accumulated disappointment. There is one more thing, I said as we were concluding. They forged my signature last year to obtain a credit card in my name. I never reported it because he's my son. Leo and Eleanor exchanged a significant look. Do you have any proof? She asked. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a credit card statement I had kept hidden. Ethan used my social security number and forged my signature on the application. He was certain I would never discover it. This changes the entire landscape, Eleanor said, her voice now sharp as steel. This is no longer just about cutting them off financially. This is about seeking justice. That afternoon, I walked through the rooms of my house. the house where I had raised Ethan, where I had cared for his mother as she battled cancer, where I had hosted 23 Thanksgiving dinners. I began to methodically pack family photographs into cardboard boxes. The album from Ethan and Olivia's wedding went in first. I remembered that day so vividly, how radiant Olivia had looked, how proud I had been to welcome her into our family. Then came the photos from the family vacations I had financed. The pictures of Christmas mornings where I'd watched them gleefully tear open expensive gifts I had spent weeks carefully selecting. Each photograph was placed in a box with a cold, mathematical precision. There was no sentiment, no lingering over memories, just the detached process of sorting and packing. Kindness leaves a door ajar. Contracts lock it shut. That evening, I received the first text message from Ethan in 3 weeks. "Dad, we need to have a talk about your retirement planning. Olivia has some fantastic ideas about how we can maximize your assets." I deleted the message without a reply. By Friday, the complex machinery of the plan was in full motion. Leo had already found the perfect buyer for my rental property, a cash investor who could close the deal in 10 days. The main house would be more complicated, he'd explained, but he had already located a buyer willing to pay the full asking price with a 30-day close. They're going to panic when they realize the ground is shifting beneath their feet, Eleanor cautioned me. Good, I said. Panic leads to recklessness, and reckless people always make mistakes. I spent that Friday evening at home, sipping tea from my late wife's china, watching the sunset cast a golden glow over my garden. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of dismantling everything I had spent a lifetime building, not to destroy it, but to save it from those who believed love was a weakness and generosity was a form of stupidity. The very last photograph I packed away was from Ethan's high school graduation. In the picture, I am standing behind him, my hands resting on his shoulders, both of us smiling broadly for the camera. I studied the younger version of myself in that photo, a man who still believed that sacrifice was a virtue, that if he just gave a little more, it would somehow inspire his son to become more. That man had been profoundly wrong about many things, but he had raised a son whose greed was utterly predictable, and predictability, as I was now learning, could be a very powerful weapon. If they were tempted by an inheritance advance, they would be signing their own financial death warrant. I just had to ensure the rope was strong enough to hold. Monday morning, the moving trucks arrived. I had scheduled them for 9:00 a.m., knowing full well that Ethan and Olivia would be indulging in their customary weekend brunch that often extended well into Monday afternoon mimosas and avocado toast while they plotted their next lavish vacation. I stood in my driveway, my polished watch catching the morning sun, as I watched strangers systematically carry away 34 years of my life. The dining room table where Ethan had once struggled with his homework, the grand piano he had quit, playing after only 6 lessons, the china cabinet filled with wedding gifts that had long outlasted the marriage they were meant to celebrate. "Where would you like this, sir?" one of the movers asked, holding up a framed photo from Ethan's college graduation. "Donation box," I said, without a flicker of hesitation. The real estate agent, Rebecca Lowe, pulled into the driveway just as the last piece of furniture was being loaded onto the truck. She was a sharp, perceptive woman who specialized in high-value properties. "Fred, darling, are you certain about this timeline? 30 days is incredibly aggressive for a property of this magnitude." "The buyer is offering cash at the full asking price," I replied. "What part of that is aggressive?" She broke into a smile. "Nothing at all. I have the contracts all ready for you." I signed the listing agreement right there on the hood of her car, in the very same spot where I had once helped Ethan fill out his college applications. The irony was not lost on me. By noon that day, Leo had successfully liquidated my brokerage accounts. The capital gains tax would be considerable, but as he had so aptly put it, freedom has a high price, but servitude costs you everything. The rental property sale closed the following Tuesday. It was a cash transaction with no complications. The buyers were a young couple who intended to live there themselves, good people who would cherish the house in a way I once had. On Wednesday afternoon, my phone began to buzz incessantly. Ethan had driven past the rental property and seen the prominent sold sign. "Dad, what is going on? Why didn't you tell me you were selling the property?" I let the call go to voicemail. He called back 6 more times. On the 7th call, I finally answered. "Vance." "Dad, it's Ethan." "What the hell is happening?" "The rental house is sold and Mrs. Peterson from across the street told me she saw movers at your house yesterday." "That is correct," I said calmly. There was a stunned silence on the other end. "What do you mean?" "That's correct. Where are you moving? Why wouldn't you discuss this with us?" "Ethan, I will be sending you a single letter. All future communications are to be directed through my attorney." "Your attorney? Dad?" "What are you?" I hung up the phone. The letter, sent via certified mail, arrived at their condo on Thursday. It was brief and to the point. "Ethan, do not attempt to contact me directly. All communications must be routed through my legal counsel, Eleanor of Associates, Fred." That very evening, Olivia went live on Instagram, broadcasting from their condo's balcony. I watched on my phone, sitting on a folding chair in my nearly vacant living room. "So, there's a little family drama happening right now," she said, her voice dripping with feigned concern. "But don't you all worry, we're going to be moving into the main family house very soon. Sometimes, older family members can get a bit confused about their finances, and that's when the younger generation needs to step in and offer some guidance." She winked theatrically at the camera. "Plus, it means more space for content creation." The comments immediately started pouring in. "You're such a wonderful daughter-in-law." "Family always comes first." "Can't wait for the house tour." I took a screenshot of every single comment. 20 minutes later, I recorded my own video. Not for social media, I've never had an account, but directly onto my phone's camera. "Insurance," Eleanor had called it, evidence. "My name is Fred. Today is Thursday, September 14th. I am 62 years old, of sound mind and body, and I am acting of my own free will, without any duress or coercion. I am making these financial decisions to protect the assets I have earned over 40 years of hard work. No one is influencing these decisions. I am fully and completely competent to manage my own affairs." Friday morning saw the sold sign go up on the lawn of my main house, the house where Ethan had taken his first steps, where I had nursed him through the chicken pox, where I had spent countless nights waiting up for him during his teenage years. I was having a cup of coffee at a downtown cafe when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Estate advance of up to $2.5 million available for qualified heirs. Pre-probate funding with a quick approval process. Click here to schedule a consultation." I permitted myself a small smile. Leo had been right. The predatory lenders used algorithms that scraped public records for estate sales and property transfers. They had found Ethan automatically. I forwarded the text message to Eleanor with a single word: "Begun." Her reply was instantaneous. "Excellent. The trap is baited." That afternoon, I signed the final papers for my cottage, a small oceanfront property I had purchased with cash from the fire sale. It had 2 bedrooms, a small garden, and an unobstructed view of the endless water. It had no ungrateful children who viewed their father's collapse as a personal inconvenience. On Saturday evening, as I was unpacking my collection of watches in my new bedroom, my phone chimed with a notification. Someone had tagged me in a social media post, even though I had no accounts. My real estate agent, Rebecca Lowe, had posted a celebratory photo. Sold in just 12 days. Another happy client at Lowe Real Estate. In the background of her photo was my former house, with a bright red sold banner stretched conspicuously across the front yard. I could only imagine the look on Olivia's face when she saw it. They had viewed me as a field where they could sow their greed and reap the rewards. They were about to learn that I was the fence, built to keep them out forever. Sunday morning, I prepared breakfast for myself in my new kitchen eggs, Benedict with fresh chives from my small garden. I sat and read the newspaper in blissful silence. There were no interruptions, no demands. No performative family melodramas staged for social media engagement. My phone's call log showed 17 missed calls from Ethan and 4 from Olivia. I deleted them all without listening to the voicemails. At 2:47 p.m. I received an email notification. Ethan had clicked the link to schedule a call with the Inheritance Advance Company. The hook was set. Julian Croft's office was located on the top floor of a gleaming downtown skyscraper. It was all chrome and glass, with a bowl of green apple-flavored mints on the reception desk. I had never met the man, but Leo had conducted thorough research. Croft specialized in estate advance solutions for impatient heirs, with interest rates that would make a loan shark blush. I sat in my cottage garden on Tuesday morning, reading through Leo's intelligence report while sipping coffee from my late wife's china. Croft's company, Legacy Forward Capital, had a staggering 94% default rate. Their contracts were masterpieces of legal predation, filled with personal guarantees, cross-default clauses, and collection mechanisms designed to strip assets faster than a pack of wolves on a carcass. Perfect, I murmured to the salty air. According to a surveillance report Eleanor had commissioned, Ethan arrived at Croft's office on Monday afternoon, dressed in his most expensive suit, the one I had purchased for him for job interviews 3 years prior. Olivia waited in the lobby, live streaming her experience with a mobile manicurist she had hired for the occasion. Croft, according to his secretary, whom Leo had skillfully befriended at a nearby coffee shop, greeted Ethan with a practiced, disarming warmth. "We don't like to call it debt," he had said, gesturing expansively at the city skyline visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "We prefer to think of it as a bridge to your future." The contracts were as thick as encyclopedias, laden with cross-collateralization clauses, first-position liens, and what Croft cheerfully referred to as performance incentives. Penalties that doubled on a monthly basis if payments were missed. Ethan, intoxicated by the promise of immediate, effortless money, signed everything without reading the fine print. He used electronic signatures on a tablet, all of which were legally binding. The personal guarantees were ironclad. He was now personally liable for every single penny, irrespective of whether an inheritance ever actually materialized. The first tranche of the loan was for $350,000. After Croft's exorbitant fees, they walked away with just $180,000 within 12 days. According to the credit monitoring reports Leo had legally obtained, they had already burned through half of it. There was a new BMW lease for Olivia, a suite of designer furniture, back taxes they had long been evading, and a consultation with one of Beverly Hills' most expensive plastic surgeons for Olivia's brand enhancement. When their funds started to dwindle, Croft introduced them to his short-term liquidity partner, a man named Victor Kozlov. I had done my own research on Kozlov. Born in Montenegro and educated in the harsh school of street enforcement, he specialized in urgent collection services for high-risk loans. His online reviews were chillingly fascinating. "Very motivated to collect," one read. Another said, "Helped us understand the critical importance of timely payment." The first text from Kozlov to Ethan arrived on a Wednesday evening. It was a photograph of Ethan's car, parked in his office's parking garage, time-stamped at 6:47 p.m. A second photo, sent at 6:51 p.m., showed the same car from a different angle, proving that Kozlov had circled it. There were no words, no explicit threats, just the cold, hard evidence of his presence. Ethan called Olivia in a panic. She dismissed him as being overly dramatic and accused him of manifesting negativity. Then, Kozlov sent a photo of their condo building. The same treatment. Multiple angles, precise timestamps. Still no threats, just meticulous documentation. On Thursday evening, Kozlov appeared at their door in person. He was 6'4", with knuckles scarred like the bark of an old tree, wearing an expensive suit that somehow made his aura of violence seem more professional. He had brought flowers. "For the beautiful wife," he said to Olivia, his accent as thick as motor oil. "I am Victor. We will be working together now." He sat in their living room for exactly 11 minutes, admiring their new furniture, complimenting Olivia's Instagram aesthetic, and asking polite, innocuous questions about their lifestyle expenses. When he left, he had somehow managed to convey the entire terrifying scope of their vulnerability without making a single overt threat. The scuff marks from his expensive Italian shoes remained on their pristine white marble floor. Olivia scrubbed at them for an hour, but could never quite make them disappear. By Friday, their credit cards were maxed out. The payment for the new BMW bounced. Olivia's plastic surgery consultation was abruptly cancelled when her deposit check was returned for insufficient funds. That evening, they received a formal notice from Julian Croft's office. Payment number 1, in the amount of $47,500, was now due. They were given a 72-hour cure window. They didn't have $47,500. They didn't even have $4,750. On Saturday morning, Olivia went live on Instagram again. Her usually flawless makeup was slightly smeared, and her voice trembled. "Sometimes the universe tests your resilience," she said, her voice shaking, "but we are stronger than our challenges." In the background of her video, moving boxes were clearly visible. They were being evicted from the main house they had never actually owned. Sunday night, Kozlov sent one final text. It was a photo of himself, standing outside their favorite restaurant, the one where they had celebrated signing the inheritance advance papers. His massive frame filled the camera's view, and his smile looked like a crack in a slab of concrete. The message was unambiguous. "We know where you go, what you love, how you live." Monday morning, a call came from their bank. "Mister, we're calling to inform you of some irregular activity on your accounts. We've received multiple fraud alerts from various sources and will need to verify your identity before we can process any further transactions." Their accounts were frozen. Their credit cards were declined. The carefully curated life of borrowed luxury they had constructed crumbled around them in the space of a single weekend. That evening, desperate and backed into a corner, they made the fatal decision that would utterly destroy them. They decided to unlock their inheritance themselves, using my social security number and a copy of my driver's license that Ethan had surreptitiously photographed years earlier. They believed they were solving their problems. In reality, they were walking directly into a trap I had specifically designed for thieves. On Tuesday morning, I received a call from Detective Marcus Thorne of the Financial Crimes Unit. Mister, we need to discuss some unusual activity involving your identity. Would you be available to meet with me? Of course, Detective, I replied, adjusting my tie pin. I've been expecting your call. The endgame was about to begin. At this juncture in the story, I want to pause and speak to you directly. If you are listening to this, and it's resonating with your own family situation, whether you're facing financial abuse, emotional manipulation, or simply dealing with people who mistake your kindness for weakness, our book, Forging Your Path After the Pain, includes an entire section on how to recognize financial predators within your own family. Far too many of us fall into the trap of believing that blood relations are an excuse for toxic behavior. They are not. Chapter 8. The Calculus of Boundaries provides a precise breakdown of how to protect your assets without being burdened by guilt. The link is in the description, and for a limited time we are offering free shipping. Do not wait until you are in the midst of a crisis to protect yourself. Now, let's return to Fred's story, because what happens next is nothing short of explosive. Detective Marcus Thorne was younger than I had anticipated, with sharp, intelligent eyes, and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from years of observing people lie for a living. We met at a coffee shop near the courthouse. Neutral ground, he had suggested, though I suspected he wanted to assess me in a less formal setting. Mister, we have received multiple fraud alerts connected to your identity. Your son and daughter-in-law have been quite active. I took a slow sip of my tea and waited. Patience, I had come to learn, was a formidable weapon. They've made several attempts to access your accounts, open new lines of credit, and claim inheritance payments using your personal information. Were you aware of this activity? I suspected as much, I said carefully. Ethan has used my information in the past. I chose not to prosecute at the time. Detective Thorne leaned forward slightly. At the time? I am older now, Detective, and I am wiser, and I am significantly less forgiving. A faint smile touched his lips. Would you be willing to cooperate with us in a controlled operation? We've been investigating inheritance advance fraud for months. Your case could be the key to catching some much bigger fish. What would that entail? I asked. We set up a sting operation. We let them believe they are about to receive a substantial payout. We record the entire transaction, and we arrest them in the act. It would be clean, simple, and legally airtight. I nodded slowly. I am very interested in airtight. That very same morning, while I was meeting with Detective Thorne, Ethan was facing his own escalating crisis. The first payment to Julian Croft was due in 36 hours, and they were nowhere close to having the money. Victor Kozlov had begun calling every 3 hours, his voice remaining polite, but with an increasingly pointed edge. Ethan, my friend, he'd say, I drove by your beautiful building this morning. So many very nice cars in the parking garage. It makes a man think about value, you know. The threat was veiled but unmistakable. Their BMW, their neighbor's Mercedes, the entire building's parking structure, all of it was potential collateral in Kozlov's fluid interpretation of debt collection. Olivia tried desperately to maintain their facade. Her Instagram stories that day featured her doing yoga on their balcony and promoting a mental wellness reset. But the tone of the comments had shifted. People were starting to ask pointed questions. Where's the house tour? Whatever happened with the family estate? You seem really stressed lately, Ann. Her follower count had begun to drop. Brand partnerships were being reassessed. The influencer economy, built on a foundation of aspirational perfection, has no patience for visible struggle. On Wednesday evening, Julian Croft called Ethan personally. Ethan, buddy, we need to have a little chat about your payment schedule. I just need a little more time. Ethan pleaded. "The estate settlement is more complicated than we thought." "Time is an expensive commodity, my friend," Croft replied smoothly, "and my associates are beginning to charge storage fees for their patience." That night, unable to sleep, Ethan made the call that would seal his fate. Using a voice-altering app on his phone, he called my old bank, pretending to be me. "Yes, this is Fred. I need to access my account. I seem to have misplaced my password." The entire call was recorded. Every word, every lie, every desperate attempt to steal my identity was captured on the trap line that Detective Thorne and I had established. The bank representative, who was in fact an undercover detective, played her part to perfection. "I'm very sorry, mister, but for your security I need to verify some information first. Can you please tell me your late wife's maiden name?" Ethan guessed. "Incorrect." "And what was the name of your first pet?" Another guess. Also incorrect. "I'm having trouble verifying your identity, mister. Perhaps it would be best if you came into the branch tomorrow with some proper identification." "No." Ethan's voice cracked with panic. I'm currently traveling out of the country. Can't we resolve this over the phone? I understand your frustration, sir, but bank policy requires..." He hung up. On Thursday morning, Olivia tried a different tactic. She drove to a different branch of the bank across town, armed with a fake ID she had purchased online, and a fabricated story about needing to access her confused elderly father-in-law's accounts to cover urgent medical expenses. This bank branch was also a part of our sting operation. She lasted for 6 minutes before the inconsistencies in her story began to unravel. The fake ID was an obvious forgery. She couldn't answer basic security questions about my financial history. When the teller pressed her for more details, she became aggressive, demanding to speak to a manager who understands what a family emergency is. The teller, another undercover officer, remained calm and professional while hidden cameras captured every moment. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to wait right here while I go speak with my supervisor." Olivia waited for 15 minutes before her nerve broke. She fled the bank, leaving behind the fake ID and her purse, which contained additional forged documents. By Thursday evening, their situation had become dire. The payment to Croft was due at midnight. Victor Kozlov had begun driving past their building every few hours, each pass documented with time-stamped photographs sent directly to Ethan's phone. That night, cornered and terrified, they made their final catastrophic mistake. Using a check-kiting scheme between their last 2 functioning bank accounts, they attempted to create artificial funds to pay off Croft. Check-kiting is a federal offense. Banks have sophisticated algorithms that can detect such activity within hours. By Friday morning, both financial institutions had filed suspicious activity reports with the FBI. On Friday afternoon, Ethan received a text message that must have seemed like a lifeline from heaven. Estate inheritance release meeting scheduled. 400. 0 available for immediate disbursement. Conference Room B, Commerce Tower Complex, Saturday, 3:00 p.m. The text came from a number that appeared to have official-looking authentication codes. The meeting location was a real, legitimate business complex, complete with security cameras and professional conference rooms. What Ethan didn't know was that the meeting was a complete fabrication, orchestrated by Detective Thorne and his team. The conference room was wired with hidden cameras. The money was a stack of marked bills from the police evidence locker. And the estate attorney he was scheduled to meet was an undercover FBI agent. On Saturday morning, as Ethan prepared for his fake inheritance meeting, I was in my garden, deadheading the roses and contemplating the nature of justice. The roses had been my late wife's favorite. They were a deep, velvety red, perfectly formed, beautiful to behold. but sharp enough to draw blood if handled carelessly. Much like revenge, I mused. My phone buzzed with a text from Detective Thorne. "Everything is in place. Are you ready?" I looked out at the ocean, its surface calm and stretching to the horizon. "Yes," I texted back. "I'm ready." Ethan arrived at the Commerce Tower building that afternoon, wearing his most confident smile and carrying a briefcase filled with forged documents. He truly believed he was about to steal 400 from his incapacitated father's estate. He had no idea that every door he had walked through had been deliberately opened for him, and that they all led to the exact same destination, a federal prison cell. The trap was about to close. Saturday, 3:00 p.m. Commerce Tower Complex, Conference Room B. I was not there, of course. I was at home, tending to my garden, and occasionally glancing at the live video feed that Detective Thorne had set up for me on a secure tablet. The video quality was superb. Every detail was crystal clear. Ethan entered the conference room precisely on time, his confidence visibly restored by the prospect of easy money. He was wearing his navy pinstripe suit and his grandfather's watch, the one I had given him after my father's funeral, back in a time when I still believed in the power of such meaningful gestures. The fake estate attorney, Special Agent Nina Sharma, posing as Attorney Williams, greeted him with a warm, professional smile. "Mister, thank you for coming in. I understand there are some pressing issues regarding your father's estate." "Yes, absolutely," Ethan said, settling into a leather chair. "He's been very confused lately, making some highly irrational financial decisions. The family is deeply concerned about his capacity." Every single word was being recorded. Every lie, every calculated manipulation, every attempt to paint me as mentally incompetent. Agent Sharma nodded with an expression of deep sympathy. That is unfortunately quite common with elderly clients. Now, I have prepared the necessary inheritance release documentation. The amount available for immediate disbursement is 400, as we discussed. She slid a thick stack of official-looking papers across the polished table. Ethan barely gave them a glance before signing his name with a confident flourish. "I will just need you to verify your identity and your authority to act on behalf of Fred," Agent Sharma continued. This was the critical moment. Ethan could have admitted that he possessed no legal authority to act on my behalf. He could have acknowledged that I was mentally competent and had explicitly forbidden him from contacting me. He could have simply walked away. Instead, he doubled down on his deception. "I have power of attorney," he lied, producing a forged document from his briefcase. "My father granted me full financial authority after his episode at work." He then signed his name as Fred by Ethan, attorney, in fact. Federal forgery, aggravated identity theft, wire fraud. Agent Sharma handed him a thick manila envelope filled with cash. "Here is the disbursement. I will just need you to sign a receipt." Ethan's hands trembled slightly as he signed the receipt, formally acknowledging that he was taking possession of marked federal funds, obtained through fraudulent representation. "There's just one more thing," he said, his confidence swelling with the weight of the money in his hands. "My father might call you asking about this transaction. He's been having some memory issues lately. He sometimes forgets entire conversations we've had. If he seems confused about this release, just, be gentle with him." "Of course," Agent Sharma said smoothly. "We understand that family dynamics can be very complicated when cognitive decline is a factor." Ethan smiled, a picture of filial concern. "Exactly. Sometimes you have to protect people from themselves." Those words, "protecting me from myself," were captured in high-definition video, complete with a timestamp and GPS coordinates. As Ethan left the building, already counting the money he had stolen using forged documents and false representations, Detective Thorne watched from an unmarked car parked across the street. "Target has left the building with the marked funds," he radioed. "All units, stand by." Ethan drove directly back to their condo, where Olivia was waiting with a bottle of champagne and her phone set up for a live stream. She had already posted a big announcement coming soon teaser that had generated hundreds of comments filled with breathless anticipation. They never got to make their announcement. At 4:27 p.m., just as Ethan was proudly showing Olivia the envelopes stuffed with cash, federal agents and local police swarmed their building. The arrest was swift and professional. There was no drama, no resistance, just the cold click of handcuffs and the recitation of Miranda rights. But Olivia, in a state of pure panic, managed to make their situation infinitely worse. When she saw the police cars flooding the parking lot, she grabbed my old briefcase, the one containing my backup driver's license and social security card that she had stolen months earlier, and attempted to flee through the parking garage. She made it exactly 2 blocks before patrol units intercepted her car. When the officers searched the briefcase, they found not only my stolen identification, but also handwritten notes in her distinctive script, detailing my account numbers, passwords, and what appeared to be a practice sheet where she had been meticulously forging my signature. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Back at the condo, agents discovered Ethan's laptop, still open to software for check kiting and online tutorials about emergency inheritance access. His browser history revealed weeks of research into identity theft methods, inheritance law loopholes, and elder abuse statutes, specifically searches for how to prove an elderly person is incompetent. Detective Thorne called me that evening. "It's over, mister. We have them on multiple federal charges: wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, bank fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy. The evidence is ironclad." I was in my living room, arranging white roses in a crystal vase, a simple pleasure I hadn't allowed myself in years. "What happens now?" I asked. "Arraignment is tomorrow morning. Given the flight risk and the evidence of ongoing fraud, I anticipate that bail will be denied for Miss Olivia. Your son might be granted bail, but with the amount of debt he's carrying, and Mr. Kozlov's keen interest in collection, he might actually be safer in custody." "And Mr. Croft?" I inquired. Thorne chuckled. "Julian Croft is cooperating fully with our investigation. It turns out he recorded every single meeting he had with your son, including several where Ethan explicitly stated his plans to access your accounts without your permission. Croft has handed over everything to save himself from potential RICO charges." After we hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine from an expensive bottle I had been saving for a truly special occasion. This certainly seemed special enough. On Sunday morning, I watched the arraignment coverage on the local news. Ethan and Olivia, dressed in orange jumpsuits, stood before a federal judge who read the charges against them in a voice as final as a slamming prison door. The prosecutor laid out the case with cold, mathematical precision. The defendants engaged in a systematic pattern of identity theft and fraud, targeting Mr. Ethan's 62-year-old father. This pattern included forgery, bank fraud, and elder abuse. The government is in possession of recordings, marked currency, forged documents, and digital evidence that spans several months of criminal activity. Olivia's attorney requested bail, emphasizing her strong community ties and her lack of a prior criminal record. The prosecutor responded by presenting the court with screenshots of her social media posts, including the now infamous dramatic old man post that had set this entire chain of events in motion. Your Honor, Ms. B.T. Olivia publicly celebrated her victim's medical emergency and has demonstrated a consistent pattern of exploitation and contempt. She is a substantial flight risk. Bail was denied. Ethan's attorney made a more sophisticated argument about the presumption of innocence and his client's ties to the community. But when the prosecutor mentioned Viktor Kozlov and the ongoing threats related to debt collection, the judge's expression hardened. Mr. appears to be in considerable danger from his own criminal associates, the judge observed dryly. For his own safety, remand is the most appropriate course of action. Bail was denied. That evening, I received a collect call from the county jail. I did not answer. I would never answer a call from either of them again. Tuesday brought the news that made the entire situation perfect. Julian Croft's company, Legacy Forward Capital, had collapsed overnight. Federal regulators had frozen all its assets, voided all of its contracts, and launched investigations into hundreds of its predatory loans. The entire inheritance advance industry was now facing congressional hearings and the threat of criminal liability. Viktor Kozlov, suddenly exposed and facing a RICO investigation of his own, had vanished completely. His last known location was on a one-way flight to Montenegro. The crushing, unpayable debt that had driven Ethan and Olivia to commit their crimes had evaporated along with their creditors. But it no longer mattered. They were now facing the prospect of decades in federal prison, regardless. On Wednesday afternoon, I had an unexpected visitor. Special Agent Sharma, the woman who had so convincingly posed as the estate attorney, stopped by my cottage. Mr. I wanted to thank you personally. Your cooperation was instrumental in closing a major case involving inheritance fraud. But I have to ask you, did you have any idea they would take it this far? I offered her a cup of tea, which she accepted. We sat together in my garden, surrounded by the scent of roses and the sound of the ocean waves. Agent Sharma, I said carefully, I knew that my son was predictably greedy, and that my daughter-in-law was performatively cruel. I knew that they had used my identity before without my permission. I knew that they felt entitled to money they had not earned. Beyond that, I paused to sip my tea. I simply provided them with ample opportunities to reveal their true character. She nodded slowly. The beauty of this case is that we didn't entrap anyone. We just waited for them to commit the crimes they were already planning to commit. Exactly, I said. After she left, I walked to the edge of my property, where my garden meets the sandy beach. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. In the distance, I could see fishing boats making their way back to the harbor, their day's work done. Justice, I reflected, was remarkably similar to fishing. It required patience, the proper bait, and the wisdom to let the fish hook themselves. Tomorrow would bring the formal indictment. The next month would bring the trial. In a year, the sentencing. But tonight, for the first time in what felt like decades, I felt a sense of complete and utter peace. The trap had closed perfectly. The debt had been collected in full, and I had finally learned the most important lesson of all. Some people will always mistake your kindness for weakness, right up until the very moment they realize they were wrong. And by then, of course, it is far, far too late. The trial commenced on a Tuesday morning in October. Outside the courthouse windows, golden leaves fell from the trees like fragments of broken promises. I wore my charcoal gray suit with a simple tie, appearing dignified but not celebratory. This was not a moment for triumph. It was merely the completion of a long and painful transaction. Assistant U.S. Attorney David Chen began his opening statement with a devastating simplicity. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about a father who collapsed from exhaustion at work, and a son who saw not a crisis, but an opportunity. The first piece of evidence he presented was Olivia's Instagram video. The courtroom fell silent as her cheerful voice filled the space. Finally, an evening without the old man's endless drama. The timestamp on the post was clearly visible, showing that it had been posted while I was lying unconscious in an emergency room. I saw several jurors physically recoil. Next, they played the recorded phone call in which Ethan had impersonated me. His voice, artificially deepened by the app, fumbled through the security questions about my own life. The jurors listened as he incorrectly guessed my late wife's maiden name, the name of my first pet, and the street where I grew up, all while attempting to steal my identity. Then came the security footage from the bank. There was Olivia, dressed in designer sunglasses, striding confidently into the bank with her forged documents. Her Instagram-perfect smile, never faltering as she attempted to commit federal fraud. The pièce de résistance was the video from the sting operation. Ethan, in conference room B, signing my name with a practiced ease, lying about my mental capacity, and accepting the envelope of marked federal funds. And then came the moment that elicited an audible gasp from one of the jurors. Ethan smiling as he said, "Sometimes you have to protect people from themselves." The defense attorney, Jessica Miller, did the best she could with an unwinnable case. She tried to portray Ethan as a concerned son, worried about his aging father's erratic financial decisions. She suggested that Olivia was simply naive, a young woman who was merely following her husband's lead. But then Prosecutor Chen called Eleanor to the stand. "Ms., you met with Fred on the day after he collapsed? What was his mental state at that time?" "He was completely lucid," Eleanor stated firmly. "Articulate and sharp. He understood complex financial concepts, made logical and well-reasoned decisions, and demonstrated a perfect recall of all his assets and their corresponding values. In my professional opinion, Mr. was more mentally acute than many clients half his age." "Did he express any confusion about his family relationships or recent events?" Chen asked. Eleanor looked directly at the defense table. "None whatsoever. He was painfully clear about his son's history of financial exploitation and his daughter-in-law's public mockery of his medical emergency. His decisions were calculated, rational, and legally sound." The defense tried to argue that I was a vindictive old man, that I had set up my own son out of pure spite. But Prosecutor Chen had anticipated this line of attack. Fred did not force his son to forge documents. He did not make Ethan impersonate him in calls to his bank. He did not tell him to accept stolen federal funds or to lie about his father's mental capacity. Every single crime committed in this case was a choice made freely and deliberately by the defendants. Detective Thorne testified about the check-kiting scheme, the purchase of the fake ID, and the systematic pattern of identity theft that stretched back for months. My forensic accountant, Leo Finch, meticulously walked the jury through the money trail, showing how Ethan and Olivia had spent stolen funds on luxury items while simultaneously claiming to be concerned about my confused financial state. But the moment that truly destroyed them came from an unexpected source: Ethan's own phone. The FBI's digital forensics expert, Agent Miller, had successfully recovered a series of deleted text messages between Ethan and Olivia. They were messages sent during the week of my collapse, while I was still recovering in the hospital. Ethan to Olivia: "Hospital called again. Not going. Let the old bat sweat it out. Olivia to Ethan. Good. Maybe this will finally teach him who's really important in his life. Ethan to Olivia. When he finally kicks it, we get everything anyway. Why should we pretend to care now? The courtroom was utterly silent as Agent Miller read those messages aloud. Even the defense attorneys seemed stunned. Olivia began to cry. Not the pretty, camera-ready tears she had perfected for her social media videos, but ugly, desperate sobs that racked her entire body. Ethan sat perfectly still, his face as gray as ash. The jury deliberated for exactly 2 hours and 43 minutes. Guilty on all counts. Judge Williams scheduled the sentencing for 3 weeks later. As the defendants were being led away in shackles, Olivia turned and looked at me for the first time since the trial had begun. Her eyes were wild with a mixture of desperation and rage. "I hope you're happy," she screamed across the courtroom. "I hope destroying your own family was worth it." I met her gaze calmly and said nothing at all, because happiness was never the point. Justice was the point, and justice does not require an audience's approval. That evening, I cooked a proper dinner for myself. Salmon with fresh herbs from my garden, a glass of crisp white wine, and fresh bread from the local bakery. Simple pleasures that tasted like freedom. The next morning, I received an unexpected call from Ethan's defense attorney. "Mr. My client would like to write you a letter. He's hoping for some kind of reconciliation before the sentencing. Perhaps you could write a letter to the judge, requesting mercy." "No," I said simply. "I understand you're hurt, sir, but he is your son." "No," I repeated, and hung up the phone. 2 weeks later, Olivia's attorney tried the same approach. This time, she suggested that family forgiveness might lead to a reduced sentence for both defendants. "Ms. Miller," I said, my voice cold, "your client celebrated my medical emergency, stole my identity, forged my signature, committed federal fraud, and then attempted to have me declared mentally incompetent. The time for mercy was before they committed those crimes, not after they were caught." Sentencing day arrived with the first snow of the winter. Soft, silent flakes covered the courthouse steps in a layer of pristine white. I wore my navy overcoat, my late wife's wedding band, and my grandfather's watch. 3 generations of my family, all of whom had learned in their own ways to be strong in a world that often preferred them to be weak. Judge Williams was thorough and methodical in his address. The defendants engaged in a sophisticated and cruel scheme, targeting a vulnerable elderly victim, the defendant Ethan's own father. The psychological cruelty displayed in their private communications, combined with the systematic nature of their financial crimes, demands a substantial punishment. He looked at Ethan first. "Mister, you have shown absolutely no remorse for exploiting your father's medical emergency or for the years of financial abuse that preceded these charges. Your actions demonstrate a clear pattern of predatory behavior towards the person who loved and trusted you most in this world. This court sentences you to 18 years in federal prison to be followed by 3 years of supervised release. You are also permanently prohibited from serving as an officer or director of any corporation, and you are ordered to pay full restitution in the amount of $847,000. Ethan's face crumpled. 18 years. He would be 52 years old when he was released, if he served his full term. Then, Judge Williams turned his attention to Olivia. "Ms. Your public mockery of your victim's medical emergency demonstrates a level of callousness that shocks the conscience of this court. Your social media posts reveal a person who views the suffering of others as a form of entertainment. This court sentences you to 22 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. The additional time," he explained, reflected the aggravated nature of her identity theft charges and her central role in publicly humiliating the victim. 22 years. Olivia would be 50 years old when she was released, assuming she served her full sentence. The restitution orders were largely symbolic. They had no assets left to seize, no income to garnish, and no future earning potential to speak of. But the numbers would follow them for the rest of their lives. A debt that would grow with interest, ensuring they could never truly start over. As they were led away from the courtroom for the final time, neither of them looked back at me. Perhaps they had finally come to understand that some bridges, once they have been burned to the ground, can never be rebuilt. That evening, a small, neat envelope was waiting for me in my mailbox. Inside was a car title. It was for the BMW, signed over to me by the U.S. Marshals Service as a form of partial restitution. The next day, I donated the car to a local domestic violence shelter. They could sell it and use the proceeds to help women escape dangerous situations. Women who, like me, had been forced to learn that sometimes the only way to protect yourself is to stop protecting the people who see your kindness as a weakness. The legal proceedings were finally over. The debt had been collected in full, and now, at long last, I could begin the rest of my life. I want to pause here to address something important. Many of you listening might be thinking that Fred went too far, that family should forgive family, no matter the transgression. But here is what our book, Forging Your Path After the Pain, teaches. Forgiveness is not the same thing as enabling. Ethan and Olivia had years of opportunities to change their behavior. They consistently chose not to. Sometimes, the most loving action you can take is to allow people to face the natural and unavoidable consequences of their own choices. The link to our book is in the description. And remember, we offer a 30-day money-back guarantee because we are confident that this message has the power to change lives. But Fred's story is not over yet. What happens next will show you exactly why some bridges should be left as nothing but ash. 3 months after the sentencing, a letter arrived from the federal prison where Ethan was incarcerated. It was not from him. I had given explicit instructions to the facility that I would not accept any communication from either inmate, but from the prison chaplain. "Mr. It read, "Your son has expressed profound remorse for his actions and is actively seeking spiritual counseling. He would very much like to write to you about his journey toward redemption. Perhaps you would consider—" I stopped reading and tossed the letter into my fireplace. Redemption is a choice one makes before committing the crime, not a strategy for dealing with the consequences. That same week, I received a more interesting piece of mail, a check for $47,000 from the Federal Asset Forfeiture Program. Apparently, the government had seized the various luxury items that Ethan and Olivia had purchased with the stolen funds: designer handbags, jewelry, high-end electronics, and sold them at auction. I deposited the check and immediately donated an equivalent amount to a local financial literacy program for senior citizens. If my suffering could somehow help prevent other elderly people from being victimized by their own families, then perhaps there was a greater purpose in it after all. Spring brought an unexpected visitor to my cottage. Jessica Miller, Olivia's former defense attorney, appeared at my door on a Thursday morning, looking haggard and years older than she had during the trial. "Mister, may I have a word with you?" I invited her in for tea, my curiosity piqued. "Olivia has been trying to contact you through multiple channels," she began. "Letters, phone calls, even messages through other inmates' families. She is not adjusting well to incarceration." I poured the tea from my late wife's service, the china as delicate as a butterfly's wings. "I'm not surprised. I imagine the lighting in prison is not ideal for an influencer's content. Jessica Miller winced. She's confronting the reality of a 22-year sentence. She has had a great deal of time to think about what she did, about everything she has lost. She is genuinely sorry. I'm certain she's sorry she was caught, I replied. Mister, I understand your anger. Do you? I set my teacup down with precise control. Miss Miller, your client celebrated my medical emergency on social media for public amusement. She stole my identity, she forged my documents, and she spent months actively planning to exploit what she hoped would be my death or incapacitation. And now she's sorry because she is facing the consequences? No. She was young, Jessica pleaded. She made mistakes. She was 34 years old, I countered. Old enough to vote, old enough to marry, and certainly old enough to know that fraud is a federal crime. Do not infantilize her choices. Jessica Miller left without having accomplished her mission. As she walked down my garden path, I heard her mutter to herself, God, you really are a cold man. Perhaps. But coldness, I had learned, was just another word for clarity. That summer, I received an update through Eleanor. Ethan had been transferred to a different facility following an incident with another inmate who had recognized him from the news coverage of the trial. Apparently, even within the confines of a federal prison, there are moral lines drawn when it comes to people who abuse their own parents. Olivia, meanwhile, had been placed in protective custody after receiving threats from other inmates who had seen her viral old man post. The unofficial hierarchy of prison justice, it seemed, had its own unique sense of poetic balance. I felt nothing about either of these developments. Not satisfaction, not sympathy, just the quiet, detached recognition that actions have consequences, and consequences are indifferent to one's feelings. In October, exactly 1 year after their sentencing, I received a call from a documentary filmmaker who was interested in telling my story. Mister, your case has become a landmark in the prosecution of elder abuse. We would like to interview you about your experience. No, thank you, I said. We could protect your anonymity, change some of the identifying details. My story is not for entertainment, I said firmly. Good day. I hung up the phone and went back outside to tend to my roses. They were blooming magnificently, as red as garnets, as perfect as justice, and sharp enough to draw blood from the careless. Some stories do not need to be told. They simply need to be lived. The following spring marked my 70th birthday, a milestone I celebrated quietly with a glass of champagne and a small homemade cake in my garden. 8 years had passed since that night in the hospital when I finally understood the true depth of my son's indifference. 7 years had passed since I had made the phone call that changed the course of everything. I was pruning my roses when the mail carrier arrived with a certified letter. It was a legal notice from the federal prison system. Ethan, inmate number 47,839, had died of a massive heart attack at the age of 46. No family had come forward to claim the body. I read the letter twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in my desk drawer. That evening, I cooked myself a beautiful dinner and watched the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and crimson. I felt exactly what I had expected to feel. Nothing. Grief, I had come to understand, is reserved for people you have truly lost. I had lost my son years before he died. I had lost him to a sense of entitlement, to cruelty, and to the misguided belief that love was something to be exploited rather than treasured. The person who died in that prison was a stranger who happened to share my DNA, a ghost of the child I had once loved. 6 months later, I learned that Olivia had petitioned for a compassionate release, citing the death of her husband and her own deteriorating mental health. The petition was denied. Federal sentences for aggravated identity theft carry mandatory minimums that do not bend for inconvenient emotions. She still had 16 years of her sentence left to serve. On quiet evenings, I sometimes wondered if she ever thought about that Instagram post. Finally, a day without the dramatic old man. Did she remember the 847 likes? Did she regret the cruelty itself, or only its consequences? It didn't matter. Regret is a luxury reserved for people who still have a future. Olivia had chosen her path with perfect clarity, and now she would walk it to its inevitable end. I, meanwhile, had chosen a different path entirely. My cottage garden was featured in a local magazine that spring, in an article titled, "A Study in Seaside Serenity." The photographer captured my roses in their perfect peak bloom. Their beauty was sharp-edged and enduring like justice, like memory, like the profound peace that comes from knowing you have survived the people who mistook your kindness for weakness, right up until the moment they learned the difference. 5 years after Ethan's death, I received an unexpected letter from the State Attorney General's office. They were launching a new legislative initiative to combat elder financial abuse, using my case as the foundational basis for creating stronger laws. The Vance Protection Act would establish harsher penalties for family members who exploit their elderly relatives, streamline the prosecution process for such cases, and provide better resources for the victims. They were asking for my permission to use my name. I granted it without hesitation. If the pain I had endured could protect other parents from their own ungrateful children, then perhaps there was a form of redemption in it after all. The law passed unanimously 6 months later. I was invited to attend the signing ceremony but politely declined. I had never desired to be a public figure, a symbol, or a cautionary tale. I just wanted to be left alone to tend my garden and live the remainder of my life in peace. That same year, Eleanor retired, and her firm handled the final details of my legal affairs. The irrevocable trust I had established was performing beautifully. The investments had grown substantially, and the charitable distributions were now helping dozens of organizations that supported elderly victims of abuse. "You know, Fred," Eleanor said during our final meeting, "in 30 years of practicing estate law, I have never seen anyone execute a more perfect defensive strategy. You didn't just protect your assets. You created a legacy that will continue to help people for decades to come." "Justice," I replied, "should be sustainable." My cottage had become my sanctuary, a place where every morning was greeted by the sound of the waves and every evening painted the sky in masterpiece colors. I fell into a comfortable routine. Coffee on the terrace at sunrise, a few hours tending my garden, reading in the afternoon, and preparing simple dinners with ingredients from my own small vegetable patch. The local librarian, a kind woman named Clara, had become a dear friend. We shared recommendations for mystery novels and occasionally had lunch together at a small cafe that overlooked the harbor. "Don't you ever get lonely out here by yourself?" she asked me one afternoon, as we watched the fishing boats return with their daily catch. "No," I said, and I meant it completely. Loneliness requires missing people who were worth having in your life. I don't miss people who saw my kindness as permission to hurt me. Clara nodded thoughtfully. "You know, there's a profound difference between being alone and being lonely." "Exactly," I said. That evening, I received a call from the federal prison where Olivia was serving her sentence. She had 10 years remaining and was requesting permission to write to me. Inmate states that she has important information regarding additional crimes committed by her late husband, the warden explained over the phone. She claims she can provide evidence that might help other victims if you would be willing to hear her testimony. It was a clever gambit, I had to admit, using the promise of helping others as a way to try to re-establish contact with me. But I had learned to recognize manipulation in all of its insidious forms. The inmate can provide any information she has to the appropriate law enforcement agencies, I said calmly. She does not need my permission for that, and she certainly does not need to have any contact with me. She specifically requested, "My answer is no. Please make a permanent note in her file that I will never accept any communication from her under any circumstances, and that any future attempts to contact me through third parties should be treated as harassment." I hung up the phone and poured myself a glass of crisp Sauvignon Blanc, which paired perfectly with the salmon I had grilled with herbs from my garden. Some bridges, once burned, should be left as nothing but ash. 3 years later, I learned from a brief news article that Olivia had died in prison. According to the report, it was a suicide. She was 49 years old and had been serving the 13th year of her sentence. I read the article once, filed it away, and went about my day as usual. I felt no satisfaction in her death, but I felt no sorrow either. She had made her choices, and choices have consequences. The final choice had been hers alone. That autumn brought my 75th birthday, which I celebrated with a bottle of champagne and a small cake decorated with roses from my garden. The same roses I'd been tending for 15 years, their beauty sustained by careful attention and the understanding that some things require both patience and sharp edges in order to flourish. My phone rang that evening. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Mister, this is Simon Croft, Julian Croft's son. I hope you don't mind me calling." I remembered Julian Croft, the predatory lender who had ensnared Ethan and Olivia in a web of debt before cooperating with federal investigators to save himself from RICO charges. "What can I do for you, Mr. Croft?" I asked. "My father passed away last month. Cancer. Before he died, he asked me to contact you. He said he had something that belonged to you." I was intrigued, despite myself. "What kind of something?" "Documents. Recordings. He kept copies of everything from his business dealings with your son and daughter-in-law. He said you were the smartest person he had ever met, and he wanted you to have these files in case you ever needed them." 2 days later, Simon Croft arrived at my cottage with a manila envelope as thick as a dictionary. Inside were audio recordings of every meeting Ethan and Olivia had had with his father, copies of all the documents they had signed, and detailed notes about their behavior and statements. "Why did your father keep all of this?" I asked. Simon smiled ruefully. "He always said that people who will lie to banks will eventually lie to him, and he wanted to have insurance. But after the federal investigation, he realized he'd been dealing with someone who was 3 moves ahead of everyone else." "What do you mean?" I asked. "He figured out that you had orchestrated the entire thing, that you had let them think they were getting away with it while you were building an airtight legal trap around them. He called it the most elegant revenge he had ever witnessed." That evening, I sat in my garden and listened to the recordings as the sun set over the ocean. I heard Ethan's voice, brimming with cruel confidence, explaining to Croft how his confused old father would never know what was happening to his money. I heard Olivia laughing about my medical emergency and joking about my eventual funeral, their true selves preserved forever on tape, documenting exactly who they had chosen to be. I kept only one of the recordings, the one where Ethan says, "The old bat trusts me completely. He'll sign anything I put in front of him." It was evidence, should I ever need it, of just how thoroughly they had misunderstood both my character and my capabilities. The rest of the files I burned in my fireplace that night. Some things are better off reduced to ash and memory. As I watched the papers curl and blacken in the flames, I thought about the younger man I had once been the man who had believed that love should be unconditional, that family loyalty was sacred, that kindness would always, eventually, be rewarded with kindness. That man had been wrong about many things, but he had been right about one fundamental truth. Some lessons can only be learned through hard experience, and some people will only reveal their true character when they believe they are safe from the consequences. The flames danced higher, consuming the last tangible evidence of my son's betrayal and my daughter-in-law's cruelty. In the morning, there would be nothing left but ash, and the quiet wisdom that comes from surviving those who mistake your love for weakness. I poured myself one final glass of wine and stepped out onto my terrace, where the ocean stretched endlessly toward the horizon, dark and deep and utterly serene. Tomorrow would bring another sunrise, another day in the garden, another page in the life I had built from the ashes of the one they had tried to destroy. And that, I thought, was victory enough. This morning, as I write these final words, I am 82 years old. 20 years have passed since that night in the hospital, when I was forced to confront the true depth of my son's indifference and my daughter-in-law's cruelty. I am sitting in my garden, surrounded by the same roses, which are now magnificent after 2 decades of my careful tending. Their thorns are as sharp as the day I planted them. The cottage that became my sanctuary is weathered by the sea air, but remains sturdy, its windows facing an ocean that changes its colors with every shift of the light, but remains eternal in its vastness. Yesterday, a young journalist contacted me, wanting to write an article for the 20th anniversary of what legal scholars now refer to as the case, a landmark in elder abuse prosecution that fundamentally changed how the courts handle family-perpetrated financial crimes. I declined the interview, as I always do. My story was never meant for public consumption, as inspiration or entertainment. It was simply what happened when a man finally learned the critical difference between being kind and being foolish. The mail this morning brought 2 items of interest. The first was a letter from the charitable trust I established 20 years ago, the one funded by the ashes of my former life. It has grown substantially over the decades, and now provides $200 in grants annually to organizations that protect elderly victims of family fraud. The trust has helped more than 30 people over the years. Grandparents betrayed by their own grandchildren, widows exploited by their stepchildren, elderly parents whose children saw their inheritance as a right rather than a gift. Each person who has been helped represents a small victory against the insidious assumption that family ties can excuse any cruelty. The second piece of mail was more intriguing. It was a royalty check for $847 from a law school textbook that uses my case as a study in defensive estate planning. The amount made me smile. It was the exact number of likes on Olivia's dramatic old man post all those years ago. The universe, it would seem, maintains its own meticulous accounting system. I endorse the check and walk into town to deposit it, a morning ritual I follow whenever the weather permits. The walk takes me past the elementary school, where children's laughter at recess sounds as bright and clear as wind chimes. It takes me past the bakery, where my friend Clara, now in her 80s herself, still makes the best sourdough bread on the entire coast. It takes me past the harbor, where the fishing boats rest peacefully between their battles with the sea. At the bank, the young teller recognizes me and smiles. "Good morning, mister. Another book royalty?" "Another book royalty," I confirm, signing the deposit slip with the same steady hand that once signed the documents of war against my own blood. The walk home takes me past the cemetery where my wife is buried, the only member of my family who ever truly loved me without conditions. I visit her grave every month, bringing roses from our garden and telling her about the life I have built from the wreckage of the one we had planned to live together. 20 years, I tell her headstone today. 20 years since I learned that some people will mistake your love for permission to hurt you right up until the moment they realize they were wrong. The marble is worn smooth by decades of wind and rain, but her name is still clearly visible. Eleanor, beloved wife. Below it is an inscription I chose myself. She loved without conditions and expected nothing in return. The exact opposite, in every conceivable way, of the son who bore our name. That evening, I prepare my usual simple dinner. Salmon from the local fisherman, vegetables from my garden, and a slice of bread from Clara's bakery. I eat by candlelight on my terrace, watching the sun paint the ocean in shades of gold and crimson, the colors just as magnificent as they were 20 years ago when I first began to learn how to find peace in solitude. My phone rings. It's a number I don't recognize. Probably another documentary filmmaker or a journalist seeking to turn my trauma into their content. I let it ring. In the distance, a large ship moves slowly across the horizon, its lights twinkling like earthbound stars. I wonder about the people on board, where they are going, what they are leaving behind, and whether they have learned the lessons that I learned so late in my life. After dinner, I settle into my reading chair with tonight's mystery novel, an English cozy mystery where justice always prevails and the guilty always face the consequences. It is fiction, perhaps, but satisfying in its moral certainty. As I read, I think about the questions people would ask me if I ever granted those interviews. Do I ever regret what I did? Do I miss my family? Do I feel any guilt about how things turned out? The answers are simple. No, no, and no. Regret is reserved for actions you wish you had not taken. I regret nothing about protecting myself from people who saw my kindness as a weakness. Missing a family requires having had a family that was worth missing. I had a wife who was worth missing. I never had a son worth missing. Only a man who shared my DNA and exploited my love and guilt. Guilt belongs to those who cause harm. I did not force Ethan to forge documents, to steal my identity, or to celebrate my medical emergency. I simply stopped preventing him from facing the consequences of the choices he made so freely. Before going to bed, I check the locks on my doors, a ritual that is now more habit than a necessity in this safe seaside community. But security, I have learned, is as much a state of mind as it is a matter of deadbolts. In my bedroom, I remove my watch, the same watch that witnessed every signature that built my enemy's destruction. It gleams in the lamplight, a testament to endurance and precision, like justice. Like revenge served with mathematical accuracy, like the profound peace that comes from knowing that some bridges should burn to the ground and some doors should remain locked forever. I place the watch in its velvet-lined box and prepare for bed, secure in the knowledge that tomorrow will bring another sunrise, another day in my garden, and another page in the story I chose to write for myself. After I learned that some people will see your love as permission to hurt you. They called me old. They called me dramatic. They called me a bat. I called my lawyer. And in the end, that made all the difference.